All right, thank you guys very much. So when I originally gave a version of this talk, it was targeted at people who had no idea really what SRE it was or how to build it. They just know they want to do this SRE thing. So we all know what it is. I mean, I'm from the Bay Area when I started this, so that's where SRE grew up. As soon as you get outside the Bay Area, a lot of people don't really have an idea of what this thing is. They think it's operations, or they think it's some sort of little magic pill that they're going to throw into their organization and fix everything. The term was coined by Ben Traynor, 2006, I think, give or take. Basically, he defined it as, this is what happens when you turn operations into a software engineering problem. We are trying to define how our infrastructure works in terms of code, in terms of automation, and really trying to keep things up all the time. So there's all kinds of companies doing this, right? You got Google, you got Facebook, you got us. Everyone's got their own SRE organization. And everyone has a different answer about what SRE is. Google wrote a book on SRE, and if you read that book, it will tell you that this is how you do SRE. When really only it tells you this is how you do SRE at LinkedIn, or this is how you do SRE at Google. So I can't tell you how SRE works. I can't give anyone a roadmap for how SRE works. What I can talk about, though, is the culture in which SRE works well, the company culture that causes SRE to thrive. These are LinkedIn's core values. Members first, relationships matter, be open, honest, and constructive, demand excellence, take intelligent risks, and act like an owner. This is why SRE works at LinkedIn. Every single one of these values, you can probably identify where it comes into play. So for example, some of you have lived this of varying sorts, I'm sure, move that fast and break things. Now my gut reaction to this is, wow, that's a stupid idea. I don't want to break anything. But when you reframe it, take intelligent risks. Well, if you're taking risks, you're going to break things sometimes, but we don't want to break things. That's not our core goal. We want to do what Facebook says now, which is move fast with stable infrastructure. You want to move fast, you have to move fast, you have to make changes quickly, but you need to do so in an environment where you can try and make that as safe as possible. So what does SRE come down to? Our job's to automate all the easy things. And, as the next step, make all of the hard things easy. Pretty simple? I don't know. I've been asked to define SRE many times. The last attempt at this was, I drink and I know things. So I'm going to go with this one. Now, automation is great, but you're never going to stop having things to do as a result. Why are you never going to stop having things to do? Because, as Ben Ferguson noted this morning, you have developers to deal with. And there's a lot of them. You're outnumbered all the time in most organizations. I know I am. And those developers they're not your only thing to deal with. You're dealing with product management. Product management is not always aligned with keeping the site up. They want to get features out. They want to drive change forwards to drive change for the customers. So at the end of the day, what do we have to do? We've got to keep all this stuff up and running. So yeah, you recognize that guy? I was laughing this morning when he was talking about Service Guard and looking directly at me, because I was the one who requested the Service Guard feature that he derided so well. Turnabout is fair play. Ben, this slide went up during a presentation of Ben's where he said that you could call him anytime for any problem, and he put his phone number up on this all-hands slide. And this came out afterwards with his phone number attached to it, which he is quite happy that I've actually removed from the slide. But this isn't who we are. So this is who people think we are. This is who people think operations is. Operations is a bunch of heroes who come in and save the day. We're not superheroes. I'm more like Batman. All right, Batman. I create toys. I create tools to solve the problems. So I go in and we have a problem. We had a problem last weekend. I woke up Saturday morning and things were on fire and people were taking care of it. But there was one particular problem with a bunch of files that were building up on servers. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll be back in about half an hour. And half an hour later, I had a little script that will go through and fix the problem. Just run this on the host, it'll do the right thing programmatically. Solves the problem for later, means nobody has to step through and do it manually again. And we do that over and over and over again. We find a problem, we create a tool, we fix the problem, we move on to the next problem. Because I am professionally lazy. That's my job. My job is to never solve the same problem twice. My job is not to jump in and solve the incident and keep the site up and running. It's my job some of the time, but it's not what I want my job to be. My job should be working on the interesting stuff. My job should be finding the next problem, not solving the problem I solved last week. Oh, Ben, you missed your slide. So I don't want to solve the problem I solved last week again. I want to solve the next problem. Because if I'm solving the same problem over and over and over again, then I am exactly what Ben said was the first level of SRE. I'm the firefighter. I'm the hero who jumps in and solves the problem. And oh, Todd, you're so awesome. You solved that problem. Great, you're always there. Yep, I'm always there because I can never go on vacation. Because I'm the one who has to jump in and solve the problem all the time. That's not what I want. That's not what anyone wants. So my job is to document the problem and move forwards. And this sounds really odd to a lot of these, some of us used to be them, the old school sysadmins. You want to keep your domain knowledge to yourself. You want to be irreplaceable so that you can never be let go from the company. Why? If you can never be let go, if you're the guy who always has to solve that problem, you're not going to move on to what the next problem is. You're not going to learn the new things. So now we're starting to get into what an SRE needs to be within your organization to work. So one of the biggest things an SRE needs to be is an SRE needs to be a coder. I say coder, you say developer, you say engineer. All the terms are more or less the same. It's probably more right to say engineer, though. Because, yeah, I hacked together a script last Saturday. And that's great. That script will solve a problem. But that's not good enough. I'm writing code that's going to support our infrastructure. I need to do all the same things that our engineers do when they're developing the applications that actually run the site for customers. That means your SREs need to know how to write code. They need to know how to read code and review code. Because at the end of the day, if you're developing tools infrastructure for a company, you really need to go through all the same processes that everyone else does when you're writing this code, when you're reviewing it, when you're getting it out the door. Because if I don't build things like monitoring into my code, then when the build system goes down, we have no idea why it went down. Another good example is if you're using a product, say Apache Kafka, to monitor Apache Kafka, you've got a problem you need to solve, and that needs to be resolved moving forward. So at the end of the day, you've got to know code. And in my domain, I really need to know code. I'm an embedded SRE. I am embedded with the Kafka development team. So for me, not only am I planning with that team and prioritizing with that team, thankfully I'm a little further up the stack so that we do our work together. But I also need to know that code, because at the end of the day, when I know that code, then when there's a site incident, it's a lot easier for me to fix that problem. I can jump in and say, well, I understand why the system is doing this. So let's fix this, and then I can go back to the developers afterwards and say, hey, we had this problem last weekend. Here's where I think the problem is in the code. Those words are really important, though, I think. Because I'm not an expert on that code. I spend a lot of my time developing tools and monitoring. My development team, they spend their time deep in the code and knowing what that application actually does underneath. So while I can make a suggestion, I don't always want to tell them exactly what to do. Doesn't work that well. My job, really, as an SRE, is to know how all the puzzle pieces put together. So we've got a build and development system. We've got tools that assign port numbers for applications. We've got methods to select ACLs for networks. These are all little bits and pieces of our infrastructure stack, and I can't expect any engineer that I'm working with to know what all of these things are. I don't even know what all of them are. I learned a new system last month, Hadoop. Never worked with Hadoop before, never wrote Hadoop jobs. I work on a pub sub messaging system. I feed the data to Hadoop. I don't actually use it. Yeah, I started learning how to use it last month, and I ran into some challenges as a result. But I know where to go and find the answers to the questions. How many of you guys actually look like geniuses to your friends and family every Thanksgiving and Christmas because you know how to Google the answer to a question they asked? To some extent, that's what being an SRE is. You know where to find the answers to all of these questions. You don't necessarily know what all the answers are. You're never going to know what all the answers are. We have 1,500 applications in our stack. I don't know what most of them do. I know what mine do. And at the end of the day, I know that I have a team around me that will be able to answer those questions about all of those applications. So, we've talked about kind of what an individual SRE is. So the next question is naturally, okay, how do you build that team? How do you get this? Yeah, I'm back there somewhere. I know I'm in that picture somewhere. And really, you can start talking about how to hire SREs, but hiring practices differ from company to company, and I like LinkedIn's. Ours is pretty good. Other companies have good hiring practices, really. So that's not really how you build an SRE team, because you can hire an SRE. I can turn around and I can take Ben and drop him in another company. I'll figure that one out later. I can take Ben and drop him in another company, and he will succeed or fail there, but he won't necessarily succeed or fail on his own merits. If the company is not ready to support SRE, then he will fail. Regardless of how good an engineer he is, how good a manager he is, he'll fail if the company around him doesn't support it. So now I'm going to get into a lot of things that he'll recognize. So we saw a variant on this in his talk this morning. What gets measured gets fixed. Now, thankfully, he didn't attribute it at the time, so I can. This came from David Henke, who used to run engineering and operations at LinkedIn. He was just slightly before my time. But the point here is that you can't solve a problem that you don't know about. If you're not monitoring your site, if you're not monitoring your application, if you don't have data, then you can't solve those problems. So when SRE started at LinkedIn, nothing was getting monitored. Nothing was getting measured. Nobody knew what the problems actually were. They just knew it was broken all the time. So the first thing that happened is you step in and you start monitoring everything. You start gathering the data to look at. Because the next step past this is that you're here to attack the problem and not the person. This is another one from Henke. There's a lot of Henke right in here. Thankfully, Henke's not here because he swears a lot more than I do. So at the end of the day, you want to solve the problems in your architecture. And the best example I saw of this was at our internal conference last year. One of my coworkers, Shannon, stood up on stage and talked about an incident that had happened the year before, where there was a major incident going on, and she took an action that actually took down the site entirely, as just a result of a mistake made. But she stood up on stage in front of all of her peers for half an hour describing this incident and what happened and what learned from it. And not every company can you be that vulnerable. Can you stand out in front of everyone? The reason that we can is because we have trust. We have trust within our organization that it's not going to be used against you in the future. So the 4 agreements were something that is talked about a lot as well. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. This is the foundation for a trusting organization. Trust is important in the SRE world because, as I said, I don't know how all of these pieces work. But what I do know is that Ben owns some pieces of the stack, and Kurt owns some pieces of the stack. We have a sysops organization that runs the underlying hardware, and when I can trust sysops to do their job properly, I don't need to worry about the underlying hardware. I know that they're monitoring it, I know that they're fixing it. It's not always perfect. There's always problems in these stacks, But they know that when I come to them and tell them that there's a problem, that I'm doing it with the best interests of the organization. I'm doing it to help them and help myself and to fix things for the future. So that trust is incredibly important, because there are 3 kinds of feedback: positive, negative, and none, and only one of those is bad. If you're not getting feedback on what's going on, especially if you run tools or infrastructure, as I do, then you have a problem. Because if you're not getting feedback, then either people don't trust that you're going to act on the feedback, or they've given up and they're working around you. If you're getting positive feedback, that's great, things are good. If you're getting negative feedback, then you know what needs to be fixed. If you're getting none, then you have a serious problem and you need to address that. So you got to pay your SREs, and paying them is important, paying them well, because they can always go somewhere else. But that's not what's going to keep an SRE at your company. You can always make more money. Especially if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can walk out the door and have a job by the end of the day that pays more money. So money's not what's important. What is important? You need to treat your team well. Now, I kind of talked about our values as LinkedIn at the beginning, and a lot of those values will also translate to how you treat people within the organization. So part of the reason I'm at LinkedIn, part of the reason I stay at LinkedIn, is because I have the opportunity to grow. You want to groom leaders within your organization. You want to give them chances to change what they're doing. When I started working at LinkedIn 4.5 years ago now, I had absolutely no idea what Apache Kafka was. I was hired to work on Apache Kafka. I was actually given an option. The director said, I have 2 jobs. One is search and one is Kafka. Which one would you like? And I said, well, I know what search is. Let's do Kafka. So I started working on Kafka. 6 months after that, I was the industry expert on how to run Apache Kafka. Kind of scary. Worked out pretty well. But the organization gave me the ability to grow into that job and to change over time. So being able to offer those opportunities, making sure that you've got an environment where people can learn and where people can make mistakes, because making mistakes is part of learning. You also want strong technical leadership within your organization as well. This is another piece that comes into play in having a good, healthy culture. We have technology leadership groups within LinkedIn, for example, that managers are not allowed. They are only technical employees, and people bring their ideas in here. They talk about projects that they're working on, and they get holes shot in them by whether it's an engineering group or an SRE group or anyone else. People make all kinds of comments. Sometimes you go into deep technical discussions. Sometimes it goes off the rails. But you get a lot of feedback about your application in the context of the tech leadership group. So for SRE, you get feedback of how it's going to run, how it's going to be monitored, problems we've run into. There's a lot of aspects to career progression that you can work on. One of the ones that I like is encouraging people to come out and talk to other folks, to engage in the community. It's actually one of our key career progression items, is being an external expert in something rather than just an internal expert. But as you start to go down this path of growth and encouraging people to become more than they are, there's one other aspect that you do have to deal with. And that's what we at LinkedIn call the next play. If you're going to grow people, you have to be willing to let them go as well. You're eventually going to learn enough that you want to do something different. And this may be something different within the company, it may be something outside of the company. But this comes back to trust as well. I need to be able to go to my management and express an interest in doing something else, and trust that they are going to do the right thing for me, that they are going to help me and understand. And that's actually why we have a term for this. That's why we talk about next play all the time. Because this is something that within the company we don't just accept, we celebrate. You talk to people all the time about what your next play is. And your next play might be your new project that you're going to work on at LinkedIn. It might be that something's outside of LinkedIn that you need to do. So I've kind of gone down the path of what the culture looks like, what are the important aspects that you need. It really does come back to the people, though. This is how you build an organization. So you've got David there, Kevin Scott, CTO of Microsoft, Bruno, who's our VP of SRE, Mohawk, who's our SVP, you've got Bosky there, you've got Rajiv, who are both SRE leaders. These are the people who build the organization. And the reason it works at LinkedIn, and the reason it works anywhere, is because it is lived from the top down by everyone. This is not just something we give lip service to. This is not just something that the ICs are living. I recently had the opportunity to leave the company and take on an exciting new role, and I passed on it. And part of the reason I passed on it is because not only do I buy into the values of the company, but I buy into the values of the company because I see it being lived from the top down. I know that Jeff and Kevin and Bruno are all taking these values to heart every day, and they show it through what they do. So at the end of the day, the culture is what builds SRE. And you have to find the culture that works, but it all does come back to trust in the end. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll also leave you with, there are a number of cultural talks that I would like to point you to coming up. At 4:30, Apu is going to be in this next room talking about multicultural teams. It's going to be a very interesting talk that I will be at. We have tomorrow afternoon at 1:20, the evolution of SRE and rising need of SRE catalyzers, which I believe is Isha giving that talk. And then Friday morning is characterizing and understanding phases of SRE practices. Kurt will be giving that talk. And all of these, you will hear some of the same themes from Ben's talk this morning echoed in these as well as we move forwards. Geez, God. I hate to give him so much airtime. Every Day is Monday in Operations is an excellent talk series from Ben and David Hankey about how SRE works. And then, of course, there is Site Reliability Engineering from Google. So I will leave you with that, and thank you very much for your time today. I don't have any time for questions, unfortunately, but I will be out afterwards if anyone does have questions.